welcome to FPL Mate, your best mate for FPL content here on YouTube. My name is Dan, and today I've got for you 11 players I think are going to change their positions for the 2021 season. So I think all of these players that I'm going to mention now, or at least most of them, will have their positions changed for the following season, which is something we should keep an eye on, especially with choosing who's going to want to come into our team, and we can start predicting that already. Yes, like I said, I've got 11. I'm going to start with the forwards and then make my way through to the defenders. I'm going to start with a fairly controversial one and basically show you how I'm basically making these predictions other than the obvious. So we're going to start off with Aubameyang, and I know that's a really controversial one to start off with, but I think he could be moved from a forward to a midfielder. Now, as you can see on screen now, I've got for you a touch heat map very kindly provided by Fantasy Football Scout. They don't actually know they've provided it for this video yet, but I'm sure they won't mind me showing off their features, their premium features. So so as you can see by this heat map, Aubameyang is playing on the wing here, like exclusively on the wing. He's not even playing particularly far forward on the wing, sort of just past the halfway line, and that's sort of how he's played at least for the second half of the season. All of the heat maps I've just taken for the second half of the season, because that's how FPL usually decide on player position changes. It's where they play in the second half of the season rather in the first half. So yeah, as you can see, not very far forward, and he's very, very wide. And if we're going by players playing as wide players, then wide players are always wingers, and the wingers are always midfielders. That's sort of how it works. So you've got your likes of Salah and your Mane, even though they are attacking players, just because they're wingers, they classify as midfielders. You can even say the same as someone like Pulisic, whatever. So for that very reason, Aubameyang has been playing out wide most of the season, particularly pretty much every game in the second half of the season as well. He's just been on the wing. He's only played as an actual centre forward for a few games at the beginning of the season. So as far as I'm concerned, he's a winger, and if he's a winger, then he has to be a midfielder, just for the consistency there. So that's what I think there. And honestly, if Aubameyang is a midfielder and he's getting extra points for goals, and he's getting clean sheet points as well, that might not say too much with an Arsenal team, but they have shored up Arsenal recently in defence, so you could get a few clean sheet points there as well. And then the bonus points as well for certain things like assists and stuff like that. You know what? It could be really good, and it would make Aubameyang have to be pretty expensive. He'd have to be sort of a, I don't know, 11, 12, maybe even more than 12 million player if he was to be a midfielder. So it's something to keep an eye on. But honestly, if he's categorised as a midfielder in this next season, I think I'm going to have to snap him up pretty quickly as well. So it could happen. It really could happen, just based on consistency alone. I know you might not agree, but you might agree with a few more here. So just bear with me. Okay, so my second one I've got for you is Marcus Rashford. Similar situation to Aubameyang, really, just in the sense that he's playing on that left wing, and he's not played as a striker all season. He's been a winger the whole entire season. You can see from his heat map, he's actually dropping back fairly deep as well, and that's not sort of behaviour you'd expect from a striker. A striker would not be that wide so consistently. So he's not a striker, is he? He's a winger. Of course, we know this already, so it's not really coming up as too much of a surprise. But again, Rashford is another one of those players that if he is reclassified as a midfielder, you're talking a lot more points. For example, that game where he got 2 assists when Martial scored a hat-trick, I think it was game week 31, 32, something like that. He'd be getting those bonus points for those assists. He could get an extra point for every goal he got. It's just similar to how Martial picked up loads of points towards the end of the season, just because his points for scoring were worth so much more. We'd be seeing the same thing from Marcus Rashford, who obviously is a fantastic player who's continually improving in a continually improving Manchester United side as well. So I think he's got to go as a winger. And on to the other side of that Manchester United attack means Mason Greenwood's got to be a winger as well. We can see on this heat map, he's even deeper than Rashford. So if Rashford's going into midfield, which I expect that he will do, Greenwood has to. And I don't think necessarily this is Greenwood's natural position, but this is where he's been playing, and you can only really put a player in FPL the position that they're playing. It doesn't matter if a player is a striker and they're playing as centre-back every single game for their club. You can't classify that player as a striker no matter how good they are in attack. if they're sitting back in front of the defenders, that's where you put them in FPL, because they're not going to be getting the same points and the same opportunities as strikers. And as you can see, Mason Greenwood dropping very deep, even into that right back position at times by the looks of this heat map. Very rarely even in the box. That's not really the heat map you'd expect from a striker. So there you go. Again, it might change if, for example, Jadon Sancho comes in. Mason Greenwood might start becoming second fiddle striker to Anthony Martial, in which case, yeah, maybe he would be justified as a striker. But judging by the data we've got so far, that's all we've got. He's got to be a midfielder. So moving on to something, I don't know, slightly less interesting prospect, I suppose, is Jota. Now, Diogo Jota obviously has been categorised in as a striker this season. The season before, he was categorised as a midfielder. But obviously, last 2018-19 season, he was playing up front, even though he was listed as a midfielder. 2019-20 season, he was listed as a striker, a forward, and he was actually playing the majority of his game time on the left wing. And I know he did play some games as striker, even as towards the end of the season as well. And it depends on that Wolves system and how they're going to play, how they're going to set up. But you judge it by the average area of the heat map. On this heat map, you can see the wing positions seem to be occupied the most by Diogo Jota. So potential there for him to be moved to a midfielder. I don't think I'd be too offended if he stayed as a striker, to be honest, because as you can see, he is getting more touches in the box. He is getting more touches in more central positions compared to some of the other guys I've just been speaking about. So yeah, there is some wiggle room on that one. So not sure how that will turn out. So let's look at the midfielders now. And first of all, Anthony Martial. And I think that's obvious from what I was saying with Rashford. If Rashford's playing on the wing and Martial's playing as a forward, they just swap positions, haven't they? That's what they need to do. They just swap their positions. You can't have both of them strikers. You can't have both of them midfielders. I don't know why you would have Martial as a midfielder anymore, because that's not where he plays. Although he does like to drift to the left, allowing Marcus Rashford to cut inside. And that has happened a lot towards the end of the season, just Martial drifting out wide. Ultimately, he is playing as a forward, and that is reflected in his heat map. As you can see, so many touches in the box, even though it is slightly skewed to the left, even though he's supposed to be a central player. You can see compared to some of the other guys where a winger would have their heat map sort of occupying the whole side of the heat map, even going right back into defence. That's not seen here in Anthony Martial. So yeah, I think it's fairly obvious he's going to be a striker. I think he's going to be a fairly expensive forward as well, like maybe a 9.5 million. So, although he was a great pick towards the end of this season, if he is a forward and he is a bit more expensive and Rashford's sort of a similar price and a midfielder, I think it might actually be time to make the switch and go for a Rashford rather than a Martial. So, I mean, that just makes sense. We like to pick players that are not in the less someone listed as a forward who is actually playing in midfield is not as desirable as a player who's playing as a forward but is listed as a midfielder. That's obvious, we know that. So let's keep going on with this, and I've got Richarlison. I don't even really know why he was ever listed as a winger. He always sort of strikes me. I know he has played some games on the wing, but he's just a forward, isn't he? Right? I think that's pretty obvious. His heat map is, quite frankly, all over the place. It really is crazy. But because he's playing in a front two with Dominic Calvert-Lewin the vast majority of the time, they do have to put in a bit of a defensive shift because there's two of them forward and they can't both just stay up front all the time. Obviously, with Everton having to defend a little bit more than some of the other attacking teams, that's going to skew the heat maps a little bit as well, making the heat maps look a bit more defensive than perhaps they actually are. But all of those touches in attack, in the box, around the box, it's very obvious that he is more of a central forward, or more of a midfielder, more of a left back, more of a right back, more than pretty much everything. But more, it's more all over the place, and more all over the place around the attacking areas than, like I say, a winger who heat map is literally just a big red blob all the way down the side, top to bottom, and that's not what we're seeing here. So Richarlison, I think he's got to be a striker. That's where he plays. And again, similarly with Antonio, I don't think this heat map necessarily does him justice, because he does actually get has got quite a lot of touches on the wings there. But I do think that is because he was playing a little bit in midfield, sorry, on the wing, I guess, before the break. So it's a difficult one, and he was playing as part of a 2 with Haller as well before the break. So that's going to skew his heat map a little bit. But from games we've watched recently, and if you've watched him, he very much is playing as the lone single striker in the West Ham team. So from that perspective, unless West Ham is saying, oh, actually, we're not playing a striker, we're actually playing just a bunch of wingers, which they're not, Antonio is the striker, then I think we need to sort of say, oh, he just drifts out into those positions and gets touches and drops back to pick up the ball, rather than him actually being a winger or even a midfielder, because there are some sort of attacking midfielder heat maps touches there. But loads of touches in the box as well, nothing like some of the other guys who really do not have many touches in the box at all. So, still, very, very simple for me to classify him as a striker, because that's what he is. Right, let's go on to, I don't know, the less interesting ones, the ones you might not have thought about. So, Eric Dier, look at that lovely big red blob in the Spurs' own half, in the defensive half. Yeah, he's been playing centre-back sort of since the break, hasn't he? I think he played centre-back a little bit before then. I know he's sort of typically a CDM, but he's not really been playing as a central defensive midfielder anymore. And I don't think Jose Mourinho sees him as a defensive midfielder anymore either. Even in a centre-back position, I don't know if Dier has been fantastic, but I do think he will get reclassified as a centre-back, as a defender, just because, well, very clearly, that's where he's playing. He's not getting forward at all. He's not a midfielder. He's not even a defensive midfielder. He's literally been playing as a centre-back. Just change him. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Right, next up, another bit of a controversial one in Fernandinho. And I know we like to think of Fernandinho as a midfielder. Sometimes he plays in the defensive midfielder role, but far more often than not, he has been playing as a centre-back for Manchester City. I don't know if that was just to cover some of the injuries that they had. Obviously, Aymeric Laporte was out for a long time. Fernandinho filled in there. But John Stones has been fit during that time, and they have had other options. But Pep has chosen to play Fernandinho in the central defensive position, even when Rodri perhaps wasn't having such good games in the CDM, where Fernandinho could have easily gone into that CDM position and picked another centre back, like a natural centre back, to go back there. But I think, in some players' older age, they like to sit back and further back positions, more sitting central defensive positions. I think that's what is happening with Fernandinho right now. He's going to fill in sort of a non-classical centre-back role, more of a ball distributing one. Maybe sort of like a Mascherano or someone like that, which would not be surprising since it's under the manager Pep Roulette, almost called him Pep Roulette, Pep Guardiola, who obviously is known for Barcelona. Barcelona known for their Mascherano shorts and converted CDM as a centre-back. So yeah, I think Fernandinho will be reclassified. I don't know how much game time he gets, to be honest. And his heat map doesn't fully show that he is a pure centre-back, because I don't think he is. But I do still think he should be reclassified. But I have a suspicion the guys at FPL Towers might miss on this one and not actually perhaps think of this in the same way. But I don't know. And then we have got another fairly boring one, Matt Ritchie. If you got Matt Ritchie in sort of late towards this the 2019-20 season, you'll know he was listed as a defender, and he got a couple of contributions there as well, didn't he? And I don't know if Newcastle actually got any clean sheets in the end. But yeah, Ritchie, he's been playing as a wing-back, but he's not really a wing-back. Historically, he's always been a winger. I think more recently he has exclusively been playing on the left wing. So, although, again, this heat map doesn't do him full justice, because he is required to get back a lot, because Newcastle are a defensive sit-back type of team. So even the forward players are going to be dropping back, which is sort of displayed by his sort of redness going back into his own half. But there's still plenty in the forward half as well. So I still think that Ritchie needs to be defined as a midfielder. That's where he's been playing. He's playing ahead of the actual left-back. So that's easy, isn't it? That's him as a left mid, and I won't go on too much about Ritchie because I can't imagine too many of us putting Matt Ritchie in our fantasy teams next season. And finally, the one you've all been waiting for. This is a shame, isn't it? It's very rare that you get a treat in FPL where just their position is listed completely wrong. I remember when the season first started and we saw John Lundstram listed as a defender. I didn't know much about John Lundstram. I think I loaded up my FIFA 19 career mode, did a search on John Lundstram and thought, he is really not a defender, isn't it? Is he? He's a midfielder, and he's not even a particularly defensive midfielder either. So a real balls up on the part of FPL. But what an amazing season that's given us with John Lundstram. He's been an absolute delight in many parts of the season. And it's really made things a little bit more fun, hasn't he? Having the listed as a defender but playing as a midfielder. I remember one of his massive point hauls. I think it was approaching 20. It might have even been 20. And when that came in, I had him in my team. It's in my starting 11. And I was just over the moon. That was one of the best game weeks I had all season. So yeah, maybe he should be a right winger by the look of this heat map. But we know he's a attacking. He's attacking midfielder, really, isn't he? So he is going to unfortunately be a midfielder next season. If only he could stay a defender. If only. He is going to be a midfielder, and he's going to probably be about 5.56 million as well. So he is unfortunately his 1 year of being in all of our fantasy teams is over, and I don't think we'll be seeing very much of John Lundstram ever again in our fantasy teams. I'm not going to lie, I don't see why he would, but you know, what a legend of the fantasy game, and what a great year we've had with John Lundstram. And after that, now that's all said and done, I did sort of quickly want to touch on the subject of, you know, wingers and are wingers attackers or are wingers midfielders? Because, well, towards the beginning of this video, you would have seen I was talking about Aubameyang and Rashford and how they should be technically classed as midfielders. I'm not really sure about this one, other than to say I would want consistency. If Salah is going to be listed as a forward, then I want Pulisic to be listed as a forward. I want Jared Bowen to be listed as a forward. You have to do it. It has to be a rigid system. You can't start making certain excuses for different players. I want it fairly black and white, fairly cut and dry. That's how I would prefer a system. You might agree, you might disagree, but that's my personal take on the matter. So for that reason, Aubameyang would have to be a midfielder. That's just by the same rules. If you did start classifying every winger as a attacker, so like going back to Jared Bowen and Pulisic, if they're all attackers, who does that leave in midfield? That suddenly makes the midfield selection really boring. Everyone's going to have the same sort of two midfielders of like De Bruyne, Fernandes, maybe chuck in a Jack Grealish, and after that, no one's going to want anyone in midfield. So you're going to have a three-man midfield, and meanwhile, up front, you're going to have all of these options, and you're not going to have a clue who to pick. So in the interest of keeping the game consistent and keeping the game fun, I do think the current system works, and it needs to be implemented very strictly, which means Aubameyang, Rashford, they go into midfield. That is my personal opinion on it. You might have something different to say, and if you do, I'd love to hear your point of view on that, and I'd love to hear if I've missed out any players who you think might get a change of position. Please do let me know in the comments. I'd be very interested to know if I've missed anyone, but I'm sure I haven't missed anyone too major. There might be a couple of 4.5 million midfielders I've missed out or something like that. But that is the end of this video. I told you the content wasn't going to stop throughout this break. I enjoy making videos too much. I really do. So the content is non-stop, never stop stopping. Stop. Yeah. So with that slightly awkward whatever out the way, but subscribe if you're new, like the video, leave me a comment telling me what you think, and continue to enjoy the break, which will be full of FPL Mate fantasy content. See you later, mates. Bye bye.